I'd like for everybody to remember that the Sons and Daughters of Liberty does have a website. It's sonsanddaughtersliberty.com. We had to leave out the because somebody else already had that. So it's sonsanddaughtersliberty.com. I'd also like to say we've got a collection plate in the back for the Sons and Daughters of Liberty because some of this stuff isn't free. So whatever donation you might be able to come up with would really help. I got one last corny joke. Do you guys know why President Obama felt it necessary for him to apologize to the world and degrade the United States?
Why? Why?
Jimmy Carter had laryngitis. Anyway. Once again, I'm very proud to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is State Treasurer Richard Mourdock. For those of you that came last time to listen to Richard speak, he's just fantastic. Richard was elected Indiana State Treasurer in 2006, which makes him the Chief Financial Officer of the state of Indiana. His leadership has earned over $1 billion for state taxpayers. His office has returned an average of 10% of his budget back to the Treasury each year he's been in office. Richard is known nationwide for leading the legal fight to challenge the Obama administration's illegal bailout and takeover of Chrysler. He took the fight all the way to the Supreme Court on behalf of Indiana pensioners. Richard is expected to make a strong challenge to the senatorial seat now occupied by Richard Lugar in 2012.
Yeah. Yes. Right.
He holds a master's degree in geology from Ball State University, is a licensed pilot, and is active in Christian missions in Bolivia. I will say one thing about Richard. If he is not the hardest working politician going right now, I'd like to know who he is. Because Richard's there anytime you want him. He and Alicia, I like to say Alicia Crabtree, is a pleasure to work with. That's Richard's secretary. And every time I call her, I say, can Richard do this? Can Richard? She said, we'll figure out a way to do it. And I know that she's echoing what Richard tells her. So anyway, I just tickled to death to introduce State Treasurer Richard Mourdock.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It is great to be back with you. And Tony said this as well, but I remember it was just before the election last fall. We were standing here, there was a stiff wind blowing off the river.
Yes.
There was a low overcast. There was this misting kind of rain, and it was 50 degrees and it felt like 30. Tony's got it right. It never changes in Madison, Indiana. How the heck can that be? But, you know, I've had that great privilege in working with the Tea Parties in many events. I remember standing on the 4th of July a couple years ago during the midst of what turned out to be 2 inches of rain down in Evansville. The next day I was up at a Tea Party event in Indianapolis and it rained just a constant deluge through the whole thing. That fall I stood on the west steps of the United States Capitol, looked over 1.4 million people, a moment I will never forget as long as I live, and had a chance to speak. And I have learned, no matter what the weather, no matter what the mood, no matter what the top story of the news is on that particular day or that particular week, the people of the Tea Party are fired up, they're not changing, and they are not going away. So, thank you all. And I have to share with you, and all of you know this, of course, that I am very much a Republican. And to this day, I'm shocked that there are still some Republicans around who aren't quite sure what to make of the Tea Party. I mean, most of us, from the get-go, were out there with you and appreciated everything you stood for because, frankly, your values are exactly what the Republican primary values are. But there are some who are a little skeptical. You know, they keep their distance, and they even tell you every now and then to get real. That was Mr. Lugar's quote, if you don't know.
We're real tired.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I like to say to the Tea Party folks, I have but 3 words for all of you. God bless you. You know, you're bringing our party back. I am absolutely absolutely convinced if it were not for the Tea Party's activities in 2010, those 83 new members to the United States House of Representatives never would have arrived, and even more importantly, those that would have arrived without you would be a lot softer in their convictions. I've been watching people that I've known from not just Indiana, but other states that I've known for a few years, and I was kind of worried they might be a little bit squishy. But I've been really pleased over the last few months. They've gotten some courage. You know, it was mentioned in the resume, it's true. I actually am a geologist by training. In fact, my graduate dissertation was in the field of invertebrate paleontology. Now, that may seem kind of strange for someone in politics, but as someone said to me not long ago, studying invertebrate paleontology was a natural because Richard, he said, you're used to working in a world of spineless creatures. And I'm glad to see some folks in D.C. are developing spines. You know, they're getting a little bit stiffer. They're not where they need to be yet. They got a ways to go, to be sure. But I'm somewhat pleased with the progress we're starting to see. You know, in coming here today, I have to share with you that there's been a lot going on. As mentioned, you know, yeah, we've announced on February 22nd that I'm going to be in the primary against Richard Lugar next year. I've had a lot of Republicans. I expected a lot of Republicans when I walk into the different Lincoln Day dinners. In fact, I'm here in town for a Lincoln Day dinner tonight. I expected the reaction when I'd walk into those rooms for a lot of people to kind of look at me and say, oh, wait a minute, you're running against Richard Lugar, and they start to treat me like I'm radioactive. In fact, the reaction has been exactly the opposite. If you don't know, it was an amazing thing. I started calling Republican county chairmen between Thanksgiving and Christmas to get a sense of where they might be in this race. And the day I announced, I was pleased to be able to say three-quarters of the Republican county chairmen in Indiana are supporting my candidacy. That is an amazing thing. Including your county chairman, that is correct. In fact, just 2 nights ago over in Harrison County, there was a Lincoln Day dinner. I didn't know this walking in the door. They actually did a straw poll. And they polled for who the Republicans' preference might be for president. And then they had the U.S. Senate race. And at the end of that straw poll, I had 80 votes, and Senator Lugar had 14. And I am seeing that reaction. I am seeing that reaction within the Republican Party from all 4 corners of this state. And my friends, in May of 2012, May 8th to be specific, we are going to win that race. Yeah. I want to share with you some thoughts, and they really combine a little bit of what Dave Vigo was saying. Because Dave doesn't know this, but I once served as a president of a company that went through much of what he was battling. And it brought back some bad memories listening to it. And he didn't say this, but if you don't know, this is an astounding thing. What I learned during a union organizing drive one time was that the union representatives, and this is the case law, union representatives can distort, exaggerate, lie, mislead, and about 4 other verbs of similar nature in an organizing election. As Dave was saying, the truth doesn't matter, and that's case law. It is an incredible situation we are in right now. And I totally agree with what Dave was saying about the motives of the people who are in the White House. And by the way, he commented that Stern has been in to see Mr. Obama 56 times, whatever the current count is. If you don't know, he has seen the president more than any other person. He has been in the Oval Office more than any other person. Probably so, including Michelle. That's probably right. But that's where we are today. I get to make a lot of speeches, I get to do a lot of public speaking, and I often get asked, you know, where do I get the ideas for speeches? And yeah, true enough, part of it comes out of the news. But part of it comes from reading other great speeches, which is to say speeches that I haven't given, because I never give a great speech. No. In January, I took the occasion to reread a speech that by most definitions is probably the greatest speech given during my 60 years on this planet. It was exactly on the 50th anniversary that I read the speech. And it was John F. Kennedy's inaugural. A Democrat, obviously. But it was an amazing speech, and most of you in this room will remember it. Those of you who weren't around at the time, I'm sure have heard it quoted, though you may not know where the quotes came from. When President Kennedy was inaugurated that day, he began his remarks by talking about the passing of time. You see, John F. Kennedy was the first person born in the 20th century to serve as president. And he talked about how the generations had come and gone, and on that day how the torch was being passed to a new generation of Americans. Born of the 20th century, tempered by war, disciplined by a hard and bitter peace, proud of our ancient heritage, and unwilling to witness or to allow any undoing of the civil rights that America had as its heritage. He went on to say that this great devotion and compassion and patriotism of the American people would forever light our nation and those who would serve it, and the glow from that fire could light the world, he said. And he ended that speech with the words you've all heard. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. 50 years ago. I know, I was listening, he was quoting right along with me. Excellent. And how old are you? 9.5 years old, and he's heard those words. It was a stirring and just amazing speech. And that last phrase about ask not, think about that for a moment, because though it is 50 years in our past, those words define the relationship of citizens to their government and government to their citizens. Being a student of history, I'll tell you they were very, very similar to the words that the president who was inaugurated exactly 100 years before Kennedy spoke. Because it was Abraham Lincoln that once said, government ought not do for its citizens what its citizens can and should do for themselves.
Right.
150 years after Lincoln's inauguration and 50 years after John Kennedy's, look where we are today. 60% of our budget, 60% of our budget this year will be for Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. I challenge you in Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution, where those so-called enumerated powers are listed. I challenge you to find words that talk about Medicare or Medicaid, or yes, even Social Security. Article 1, Section 8 says, the U.S. government shall have the power to tax, to pay off its debts, to pay for its defense, and then it says to provide for the general welfare. The next 16 or 17 little sentences all start with that two-word preposition to, because those little sentences that start with the word to are defining the general welfare. It says things like, you can raise taxes to build post offices, to provide post roads, to provide a navy. All these different sentences. Nowhere is the word entitlement present in the enumerated powers. Now I sense right